Yeah.
Welcome to the stream, everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I not only had to make sure that the connection was right, I had to make sure that I properly pronounced an Arabic name. And I want to introduce my guest, one of the creators of the film. And apologies in advance if I don't do this correctly, but it's Ahlam Muhtaseb. Did I get it?
Ahlam, close. Ahlam Muhtaseb.
Muhtaseb. Thank you so much
Mhm.
for joining us, and thank you for putting together this film. I think I want to start by asking, how long was this project in the making for you?
It actually took me and Andy Trimlett, my co-producer, co-director, 10 years just to
10
get it.
years.
Yeah, just to get it to premiere in 2017. But then it's a work in progress. We're still like working endlessly on the materials and on the screenings and many different things related to the film.
I think that there's something people don't tell you, that when you create something in the world, whether that's a piece of art or a book or a film, finishing it is only part one. Or there's 10 more parts afterwards where you have to promote
Yeah,
it, you have to combat lies about it,
yeah.
etc. So when you say 10 years and it came out in 2017, so in 2007 was when you first had your first conversations about it?
Yeah, actually, it started with my research in 2006. If we are going to take the roots, it's when I was a grad student at the University of Memphis, and I wanted to do my dissertation on Palestinian refugees and their narratives of Nakba or diaspora. But I couldn't do the project at that time because it's term, you know. So I started working on it in 2006 by myself first, you know, and at that time I took a camera with me when I got grants to go and do the film, and then I met Andy in 2007. And then in 2008, we started working together and we changed the direction of the film. It was Andy who couldn't join us now because he's with his kids. He was the one who said it's probably better if we focus on the year 1948 because of its, you know, horrific impact on Palestinians and the fact that most Americans don't know that it's contemporary history. You know, they think it's thousands of years old, you can't understand it, etc. And they usually think it's Muslims and Jews hating each other
Right.
for no reason,
You
which,
can't fix it. That's how they are.
yeah, which is not true. It's a contemporary conflict over land, basically land and resources, and it's one nation trying to you know, find its roots on the ruins of another nation. And for him, he told me as an average American, you know, it took him, you know, like he had a master's degree already in Middle Eastern studies, and he couldn't understand the conflict until he studied the events of 1948. He said it all clicks when you actually look at the events and systematic expulsion of the Palestinians and the creation of the state. And so I agreed to, you know, work with him and change, you know, the focus. But we officially released the film in 2017, but we still had to do like the final edits into 2018.
Okay.
And people think usually the easiest thing is to do the interviews, and like pre-production was probably the easiest part, and then the production was not also, I mean, it was difficult, it had its challenges, but I think the most difficult part was the post-production and coming up with all the supporting materials and doing the research, reading thousands
I
and
love the graphics. I love the
thousands.
musical choices. In fact, I have to say, I started to get anxiety after a while about, because you know the music you play when you, okay, I'm getting an account from 1948, and
Yeah,
it's that sort of creepy music in the background, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to hear a terrible story again. You know, by the
yeah.
end of the film, you'd conditioned me to get used to, okay, I'm going to hear something terrible. I need to be prepared for it.
It
So
was
I
an original score, actually.
so those choices I thought were really excellent.
Mm.
Did you find you had to cut a lot? So I think part of the challenges, especially I saw, we
Yeah.
one of the first film that we did in the series was The Occupation of the American Mind, and the
Mhm.
original cut was an hour 21, and I think the one that we saw for Film Club was 49 minutes, which I probably assume is a film festival version. did you have a director's cut in mind when you said this is the one I want, and then you were told no, it has to be much shorter? How long was the
Yeah.
original cut?
The first cut was 2.5 hours.
Okay, where is that? Can we find it anywhere?
I'm sure we have it in the archives. No one has ever asked me about that.
We want the director's cut.
Okay, we can get it to you, but it doesn't have the music or anything. It's like really rough cut.
But it'd be
Um,
fascinating to see what didn't make it. Did,
sure. Yeah. I think a lot of the cutting was okay. So when we had maybe 5 6 people talk about the same point or the same historical junction or something like this, we decided to take only three, for example, and shorten their quotes. That was a lot of the processes were like this, but we did have to cut 4.5 minutes of Ailaboon's story, which is a very, very important story of just this amazing story of a young man who's taking out of the usual thing, about to be shot in a line of other men in the city, the village of Ailaboon, where horrifying massacres happened inside actually a church. And then that man, because he speaks Hebrew, is taken by the soldiers as a human shield. But he gets a release from the officer, and then he goes to Faradiye, another village, neighboring village, where they almost shoot him again. And then he had that, promise from the officer, and they release him. And so he goes on to tell those just unbelievable stories, and it's in the extras actually, and I think it's on our website. I have to check.
well, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
I would love. I'm gonna just gonna make a note to myself
but
to
I'm
go
gonna
check it
ask
out.
Andy. Yeah, we'll send it to you. But it's very rough. It doesn't have music. It doesn't have animations. It doesn't have.
It's okay. I've already been impressed by all of that stuff, so
Yeah,
I'll know that this was the
yeah, yeah.
original thing. All of
So
those
yeah,
things.
for example, we took out, I think, Sykes-Picot agreement, because we thought, okay, let's focus on the more direct things like the Balfour Declaration, the United Nations rule. So it's a very hard process. We took out people totally out. Like sometimes we took parts of their interviews, and then we said, okay, this person is totally out. We're just going to take all of our interviews. And that was very, very hard. People can't imagine how hard it is.
Sure. I know. I see a comment here. Someone says, "I would watch the full cut. Please put it out." And I think
You know what?
you have
Yeah.
to you have to realize it's not a question of, as she said, just putting out it's this raw footage. They haven't edited together the music, put in all this. So I think it would just be this sort of series. And
But honestly, one thing I want to mention is that because we think I think where all of this comes from is that people want to see the materials, because they are very important historical accounts for people who don't live anymore. And by the way, we did over 90 interviews, and you only see 33 in the film.
it's you, I have to just be. I'm so grateful to you because you've preserved these for all time. It's digital. It's on the internet. It's an
Mhm.
Odyssey. It's in all these different places. These people are going to die. Some have probably have died
Yeah,
since the film has come out,
yeah,
and we've now through you have preserved this record. And if you make the other interviews that you weren't able to put in there available, we have access to more of those memories.
that's what we tried to do. We started doing this process, but of course, it's also an issue of funding. This is one of our challenges because we have to hire a bilingual editor to put the captions over the interviews and cut any fluff, or the introductions, the interruptions, etc. So I think we did 14 or 16 of those, and we put them out. But yes, we have to go back and do the rest of them for sure, and just have them accessed by any people who want this material. But with scholars and filmmakers, we have, anytime any scholar, any filmmaker had approached us, we gave them full access to our folders.
Right, and I wouldn't underestimate the film has a lot of goodwill. I think when I first mentioned it, the first time I saw it, maybe a couple months ago, a lot of people gave positive feedback. So I think if you put it out there and said, "Well, we could put this out if someone were willing to do the editing and this and this and this, we could do
Yeah,
it," and just say you have to do it. I think
that's a good idea.
you might get some volunteers there. Um, did you do any of these film interviews? Whose voice is the voiceover?
The voiceover is Andy. Okay, so
Okay,
that's an interesting story, because we tried to get Angela Davis. We tried so hard with Danny Glover, and we wanted like a unique voice, someone with
A prestigious voice.
not only prestigious, but someone also with activist, connections to the cause. We wanted a person of color, definitely. We don't want the typical, white male narrator, but we ended up with the white male narrator with Andy because he did the narration so we can end the film while we were looking for a narrator. And then we received, a few quotes from narrators. And when I was listening to their narration, I told him, none of them is better than yours. I mean, they are sound similar. Like, why would we pay for someone when you already did the narration?
I mean,
And
had he done it before, he sounds professional, and
yeah,
he has the right tone where he's
because he works actually for PBS. He worked for many, many years for PBS, and now he works for a station. It's affiliate with PBS in LA. So he has done a lot of like live TV fundraisers for PBS and or segments. Yes, so he does that for a living also. And that's how we ended up with him being the narrator, because we couldn't secure really the type of narrator we wanted. We approached several people, as I said, we were really hoping for a woman of color. Again, Angela Davis would have been our dream narrator.
sure.
That yeah, that didn't work. But anyway, you asked about the interviews. So the interviews, from day one, we decided Andy would do the Israeli interviews and I would do the Palestinian ones, but also Andy did some of the Palestinian interviews. And then with the historians, sometimes we did together when we had access, or we did it separately. Why did we decide that Andy would do the interviews with the Israelis is because I don't have access physically or psychologically, let's say, or mentally, because I'm a Palestinian and I hold the Palestinian ID of the West Bank. That's the apartheid system. In the Israeli apartheid system, they force us to hold green card marked,
Is it
ID.
that's the third rank? So there's the Palestinians who live inside Israel, then there's the East Jerusalem, then
Yeah.
there's the West Bank, and then Gaza is the lowest ranking of those
Yeah, I mean
identifications.
that's a very good way of describing it. But in reality, we have two colors. We have the blue and the green. So for Gaza and the West Bank, we have the green IDs. The Jerusalem and so-called Israeli Palestinians, I hate that term, but that's what they call them. They have the same ID color as the Jewish Israelis, but they have, of course, different.
Human
They're like,
animal,
yeah,
no rights.
yeah, 75 different Israeli laws that discriminate against them inside of Israel as Israeli citizens, include the Israeli law of return, the Israeli law of self-determination, like basic Israeli laws that gives self-determination in Israel, mainly to Israeli Jews over anyone else. So, but for Palestinians, of course, yes, as you said, in the West Bank and Gaza, it's the lowest, rank. And so we can't.
And am I correct? There's no moving in, but if you move, they will
Yes,
let you downgrade, right? You can go from West Bank to Gaza, but you can't go from West Bank to East Jerusalem. You cannot go from East Jerusalem to, let's say,
we can't go to Gaza
Aka.
either. Gaza
Yeah,
and
well,
West
that's
Bank,
the
yeah, yeah.
cutoff point.
Gaza is a big prison. It's, as you said, the worst. No one, even before the genocide, no one could get in or out of Gaza except for a special permit with a lot of complications.
But there
People.
was a lot of family breakups. I read
Yep,
in
yeah.
I was trying to remember who was talking about this, but maybe it was Gideon Levy, that they thought, okay, well, they'll let me because I'm married to this person. They says, no, she's in Gaza, she can't go with you, and so they moved back from the West Bank to Gaza so
Mhm,
the
mhm.
family could be reunited.
Yeah, so, that's absolutely right. And we have, of course, students who study in Birzeit. They are allowed to go, and then once they are there, they can't go back, for example. And so they are stranded in the West Bank until they finish their education. And sometimes, even after finishing their education, they can't go back for years. Yeah, we have a lot of complications in terms of movement, especially for people in Gaza. West Bank is a little bit easier, but I couldn't cross the imaginary border line that Israel keeps on changing, of course, which was changed now with the apartheid wall that was built, in the early 2000s,
Mm.
and after the second intifada or second uprising. And so I could never like cross. I would need a special authorization, and when I tried to get the authorization a few years ago, they refused to give it to me. And so that's one type of challenge in terms of access, like the physical access. The other one is like Israelis wouldn't sit down and do an interview about what they did to Palestinians, to a Palestinian herself. Especially, I'm visibly Muslim, and I, of course, have the Arab name, and my Hebrew is not the greatest, so I really struggle with.
Instant giveaway, right?
Yeah.
Um, well,
So it was Andy mainly doing the Israeli interviews, and
well,
the
I mean,
rest it was, as I said, both of us doing them either together or separately.
but I mean, there must have been moments, I think, and this is what I appreciate about academics, is that this is why I say I'm not suitable, because I get too angry, right? When I hear the typical Hasbra start to come, right? And I can,
Mhm.
get upset. But so, for example, the typical talking point, and you just related to it with the apartheid wall, says, well, does Israel have a right to defend itself? And someone had said the other day, okay, can you please tell me what are the borders of the state of Israel?
Mhm.
The fact that Israel doesn't even have it listed, Israel doesn't know what the borders are. It has no
Mhm.
constitution, it has no borders, because it has pretensions to all of it. They're
Exactly.
entitled to all of it, so they don't want to give you borders.
That's a good
Uh,
point that you mentioned that they don't have a constitution. Most people don't know this fact.
there are no limits to the state of Israel, and so that's what I appreciated about those interviews. Is when Benny Morris is saying things, I want to yell at the screen, and you just hear this interchange, and the person looks like he's at home, which means that whoever is interviewing is keeping it in a calm and level manner.
Mhm.
And so yeah, Benny Morris, he's quite an enigma for me. I have so many
I can
pieces of
explain it to you.
so many pieces of evidence. This is the whole thing. Benny Morris has supplied me with the evidence that I use against Zionists. Right? I said, well, look at Benny Morris points out in the Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem Revisited that 300,000 expulsions happened prior to May 15th. Prior.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So you want to say, oh, it's a narrative about war and 6 Arab armies invaded us and etc. It says, but what happened prior to May 15th? There were not 6 Arab armies invading you.
Mhm.
I got all those facts from Benny Morris. Now
Yeah.
I know
Oh, yeah.
other people have given them, Nur Masala, other people,
Yeah.
but he's the one who put it into this really coherent, footnoted Israeli archive way.
Yeah. So Benny Morris, okay. Benny Morris gives you excellent, detailed scholarship. And he was one of the first people to provide like very damning evidence of what the Jewish state did, in its creation, right? The problem with Benny Morris is, of course, his politics and the way he does the analysis. So he is very problematic in several, from the sense that he denies a lot of the intentions of the Jewish militias at that time. Like there was no, for example, grand scheme of expulsion or something like this, and tries to explain Plan Dalit as just a series of military orders when the British army leaves. But in reality, as Rashid Khalid responds to him, you have to look at everything that came out of those orders, all the details, the set of
I think his books argue against his thesis. If that's
yeah,
his thesis,
yeah,
if that's what he puts out, all of his books give.
exactly.
I mean, the idea, and you mentioned it in the film, the expulsion in Lydda. We have Rabin and Morris talking about the gesture, and I'm only guessing the gesture must have been something like
Like get rid of them all. Yeah.
whatever it might have been. But this is testified. No one has ever said this didn't happen. So if you have Rabin saying it and Morris
Yeah.
repeating it, and then Morris is going to tell us, but there was no plan for expulsion,
Yeah.
or or
He still is obsessed with the grand scheme of things, like a plan to expel. He keeps on saying that everything else that happened just happened organically, without this big intention to expel Palestine. It's BS, of course.
of
But
course.
also another problematic thing about Benny Morris is he's genocidal himself. I mean,
Mm.
people usually don't call Benny Morris genocidal, but if you read some of very problematic articles, and especially in the media, more than in his books and writings. I remember the first time I read something so problematic for him was in the LA Times if I'm not mistaken, around 2002, 2003. I can't recall the year now, but I could go back and check it out. And in which he actually defended the ethnic expulsion. He defended, he said,
More,
we should
didn't he
have,
say it didn't go far enough?
yes, he said we should have done it more, because if you want to build, if you have this like important goal that you have to fulfill and implement, then you should have done more of the expulsion,
Right.
and gotten more land. And yeah, so
I think you did a very good job of combating his narrative. There was another quote you when he came to Nazareth, when Ben Gurion came to Nazareth, he says, "Why are there so many Arabs here?
mhm,
Why would he have such an expectation? If he has the expectation that there should not be Arabs here,
yes,
clearly." And Ben Gurion was a genius. This is the frustrating thing as I continue to learn more. Wow, would Israel exist without Ben Gurion? He
mhm,
refused to put these kinds of things in writing. If he had put it in writing, he knows, and that's why he makes a
mhm,
gesture instead of writing it down. Please get rid of the Palestinians.
mhm,
Um, there's also these very poignant moments and very difficult moments for me. I think one of the very poignant moments, very difficult, is the Deir Yassin massacre and the
mhm,
testimony of the man. I think he still breaks down on camera
mhm,
about throw your son into the oven.
mhm, mhm,
And this is happening in 1948, and against the backdrop of which they would say that they are the victims. And
mhm.
then the echoes of, well, what happened to us in the Warsaw Ghetto? And then we turned around and we did it to them. And then there is enough self-awareness in veterans of the Haganah to orally testify. And yet people want to say it's some conspiracy theory. And
Yeah.
there it is. And you captured it. And it's a very shocking moment to hear that, because as much as you can read it, and I'm worried sometimes that I'm getting desensitized. I just finished Gideon Levy's newest book. And at some point, the part of your brain that recognizes humanity has to turn off, otherwise you can't keep finishing the book. But I thought you didn't overwhelm us with those stories. You would take a break and we would go somewhere
Um,
else, and then we'd come back, and then we had that woman also break down where she says, where is my family? So I appreciate that you were able to layer that in for us.
which woman are you talking about?
She said, oh, where is my family? And then she says, oh, my dear, I cannot go on.
Oh, that the yeah, Zubaydah Natur from Burj Al Barajna refugee camp. That's the one who woke up to find the brain of her husband
On the stairs,
and
yes, or
his
something.
brother, yeah, on the stairs, yeah. Actually, that the decision to insert some breaks came later. So, believe it or not, when we premiered at the Arizona International Film Festival in 2017, and we told them that the film was not 100% done, and they said that's fine, because in film festivals we are used to this, that filmmakers submit their films and then they tell us it's not complete. And but which was great, because it gave us a lot of good feedback. And I remember one of them came from Dr. Maha Nassar, who's a Palestinian American scholar from the University of Arizona, who attended the screening, and she gave us some really excellent feedback. And I remember her in her email mentioning, I needed a break, because we didn't have those small breaks. And we went back, and really, it's very hard to find breaks when you're talking about genocide, right? But we found breaks. We like Anwar Al Arwadi, when he talks about Yafa and the cinema, and his home. It was very emotional with the soft music. We thought that could give a break, after all this violence, one after the other. And we found several other ways to insert few moments for someone to breathe. Like, the only happy ending in the film, I guess, is
Well, we start and end with that ending, right? Where he's
yeah,
wandering, this is where my house is, and then he's able
yeah.
to, in a sense, is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm referring now to that's not a happy moment, because he went back
Oh, in
only
in,
as
in
an
the sense that
American
he's able
citizen.
to at least he was able
Well,
to go
only
for a
as an
few
American
moments,
citizen for
right?
only a couple of weeks, and he has no access to his land other than just visiting as a
As a
tourist.
tourist.
Yeah, as a U.S. tourist or American tourist. But the only one is, now I can't remember her name. Gosh, it escapes me. But the one who narrated her father going back and never coming back until one day he came actually back.
Did he go and get the money in the jar
Yes,
that was under?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. That's that. So we thought, okay, this is the only story with kind of a happy ending that we could insert to give a breather, for the audience. So that's a good observation on your part. Now, Deir Yassin has a very interesting story. If you don't mind, I could try to
Please,
tell it very
please.
quickly. So up until 2014, and when we were actually in post production already, and when Andy said, "Okay, we have to get the film out," like I can't, like we have to make a decision to just just to finish it, because we were tired. We have both full time jobs, we have families, and we kind of like swore we wouldn't do it. Up until 2014, we didn't have any survivor from Deir Yassin, and we didn't have any Israeli who at least admitted, to be taking part in Deir Yassin, the
Mm,
worst massacre um, in Palestinian history, not in terms of its devastation or how brutal it was, but in terms of how it was weaponized against Palestinians to drive them out of their land. And it's a very, very important one, but we didn't have anyone. So we said, okay, our approach is going to be we're going to have just voiceover with, some videos and pictures, and that's it, because we couldn't build a story like we did with the other cities. And in 2014, with the Israeli invasion of Gaza, I was participating in demonstrations in LA and in San Diego weekly. I was on sabbatical, actually working on the film at that time. And in San Diego, I kept on seeing, every time we went on a demonstration, I kept on seeing this older man with his wife. They were elderly, and he insisted on coming and bringing her a chair and sitting her in the street. It was just very, very interesting, to see them. So last time we were at a demo, and we knew it might be the last because they announced the truce at that time. I said, okay, I have to talk to this man. I have to know who he is. What is his story like? And so I went and I introduced myself and I said, hi, Ammo, in Arabic. My name is blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah, I'm Aziz Aqil. I'm from Deir Yassin. And I was like, what? Like the Deir Yassin? He said, yes, there's only one Deir Yassin. And I said, are you a survivor? And he said, yes, of course. I was 7 years old, I think he said. And I said, oh my God, like, do you remember? He said, yes, of course, I remember everything. Then I had to tell him about the film, knowing Andy would have killed me. But anyway, I still did. Would you sit
What?
for
What?
hours?
What? He would have killed you because you were keeping it secret, or
No, because we have to finish.
you wanted to finish it. You didn't want to add one more interview
No
with.
more going back to pre-production. We
Right.
just have
Right.
to go and finish. And he said, yeah, but probably you should talk to my brother. I was like, you have a brother? He said, yeah, he was older than me. I think he was 11. And his name is Uthman Aqil, the one you see actually in the documentary. We didn't interview the Aziz, the younger brother. We ended up interviewing the older one. He wrote 3 books. One of them was on Deir Yassin. He has maps. And I took all the information and I said, Andy, I know you're going to kill me, but we really have to do this. And Andy actually agreed. He's like, no, we can't pass on this. So here is a pure coincidence. It took us 8 months in going back in production to to build that segment.
Wow.
8 months of hard work. And it took the shape of so many different things. The easiest one was doing the interview with him. We went to his house, both of us. He lives in Escondido, which is like northeast of San Diego. Um, we were at his house for 3 hours. We looked at the maps. Some of it actually he drew by his hand. He explained everything to us. You don't see. That's why the interviews, the raw interviews, are very important. Because yes, exactly, like for a scholar to see the Deir Yassin interview, it was a wealth of information. And we
Extraordinary.
always, this is someone, actually a kid who was running from one place to the other, running from death to find, multiple ways of brutal killing. He had many other stories that we didn't include. We focused on the 2 more important ones. And the decision making process was very hard with this one, and I will tell you why. But anyway, so we actually ended up saying, okay, we have a Palestinian, we need an Israeli. So that was Andy's job. So Andy found 3 people who were still alive, who might have been in Deir Yassin, or actually said they were in Deir Yassin. He contacted the first one, and the first one had a stroke and couldn't, I think, talk anymore, and died after a short period of time. He went to the next one. The next one said, well, I wrote a book on it, read my book. and refused to do an interview. And Andy actually read the book, but it's one of a part of our bibliography. And then the third one, Gihon, that you see in the film, is the only one who agreed to sit for an interview. He was not, according to him, actual participant in the in the massacre, but he was an Irgun commander who was
I
sent.
can't imagine that he's going to admit on camera that he would be.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sorry, he was Haganah. So Haganah had always maintained that they had never known about the massacre. They didn't take part in it, etc. But we know that actually they did, and there is an account of at least two people from the Haganah sent to collect information and data, and one of them is a photographer, and that all he had to do is just take pictures. So we know probably there are hundreds of pictures about the massacre that are sealed under the Israeli information law, which we could talk about later because that's also important. The embargo information that had been extended and extended, and now it's set at 90 years. But
it'll be 900. It'll be 900 years soon, I'm sure.
Probably. So, and the question is, why are they? What are they hiding? Right? Like if you keep on saying
it's the most moral army in the world, what is there to hide?
And if you keep on saying we defend ourselves, we just defend ourselves, we are victims, then okay, show us the evidence. But they seal the evidence from both Palestinian sources and Israeli sources because they destroyed the Palestinian National Archives twice, actually now 3 times with Gaza, basically.
But the first time was in the 82 invasion of Lebanon, yes? Or
no, the first time is 1948.
Oh, yes.
I mean, when you destroy 500
Sure.
500 towns and villages,
yes,
and destroy everything and loot the rest, and when you have control over all information, even and that is incremental also. So those are like the main episodes. But I mean, think about some historical episodes, like when Israel in the 2000s closed down the Orient House and the Palestinian Society of Palestinian Studies Society or something like this. I can't remember its exact name, in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, yeah.
It's still closed. They still seal it, and they actually looted all the important studies that they had been producing up until that moment. Like this is one episode, and I can go on and tell you about all the multiple forms of looting Palestinian National Archives and its different manifestations, including the looting that happened in Beirut of the Palestinian cinema, for example. That's my specialty. Third cinema, the revolutionary cinema. They looted everything they found or destroyed it. It's either or. So anyway, we find Gihon. I'm going to go back to the story because it's very interesting. And we did the interview. Of course, he was not, like he told the scholar, the Israeli scholar, who was, a radical non-Zionist scholar, Rana Sila. She did the interview for us. He told her to come and visit, but never try to interview him again. He was done interviewing. He was emotionally triggered talking about it. And you can see the cognitive dissonance because he tells the horrors of what he saw and people eating jam and marmalade. And
he says, I didn't think about marmalade, for some time afterwards.
Yeah, but at the same time, he says, actually, at one point in the interview, he says that was the only dark spot in the history of Israel. We took that out because it was not true. Factually, we couldn't keep it. It was actually in the first cut. You will see it if I send you that. But eventually, we went for the factual accuracy was very important for us, so we had to take it out. So anyway,
I think you did an excellent job of having Israelis admit on camera that they were not these great heroes. In fact, if I were to look at the catalog of the Israeli or the Haganah veterans that or Irgun or whichever they were allied with, I would say 80% were willing to admit to some kind of wrongdoing, that they were not proud of this, they didn't celebrate this. Whereas that guy says, it's one thing to want a state, it's another thing to have a state, etc.
Yeah.
And then you have these problematic statements. One that I wrote down, he talks about the people being expelled and then the people from Europe coming in. And he says, it's not that it's right or wrong, it's just a fact. How could you say it's not right or wrong? I mean, it's crazy to say this.
Yeah.
And then the other one, the guy who talks about waiting in ambush and the Palestinian hugged him and then he shot him.
Yeah.
And then he laughed. And I didn't know whether this is the sort of laugh of trauma or just a laugh of a total unawareness of the fact that why would you laugh?
Mordechai Ben Aur is another very, very interesting character. Yeah, and he's actually a well-known historian in Israel, um, or at least he self-described himself as a historian. But he's a very interesting person because the cognitive dissonance, the way he deals with his cognitive dissonance is unbelievable, because he sounds like he's speaking from both sides of his mouth, literally, because he would tell you an atrocity and then says, well, I had to do it because I wanted a state, and this is the kind of state I wanted, and so because of that it's okay, to do
A
all these
state founded on murder and atrocity, just the kind of
yeah,
state that you
yeah.
want.
Like he admits what they did to the Palestinian refugees, but then he says, like, it's horrible. They are expelled. They still live in horrible conditions. They didn't run away. They were forced out. So he admits to all of this, but then says, but I don't want them back. Like, again, that was the most interesting guy in the documentary, honestly, is Mordechai Ben Aur. Um, and
Yeah,
I
that
think
it strikes
I
me
think
that in that.
people sometimes want to give him the benefit of the doubt, including Andy. But I think like that's the murderous mentality. Like you find reasons to kill and genocide.
Hmm.
And anyway, but just one last final thought on Deir Yassin is that we found a lot of other survivors. We interviewed them. We transcribed the interviews. We went back in fact checking, 8 months of fact checking. I just wanted to point out, doing the
So
interview is the easiest part, and even doing the editing is difficult, but it's not the most difficult part. With such documentary, the most difficult part is to actually corroborating evidence from other sources,
hmm.
and following the evidence where you can find it. Then I found, survivors and descendants in Chicago, and a lot of Deir Yassin residents, believe it or not, in New York and New Jersey. We found a bunch of them, and also started finding references that no one knows about. Arif al-Arif, a Palestinian scholar who wrote the first Nakba book in 1956. Okay, wait a second. It's behind me. Let me show you, because
I'm assuming it's in Arabic, yes.
yes, and that's on my bucket list. Oh, there it is. Actually, it's hidden down here. It's 3 volumes of this.
Wow,
3
extraordinary.
volumes. The first one, Arif al-Arif, in 1956. No one knows about this. No one uses it. I came across it by coincidence, and here how it looks in Arabic. Sorry.
Hmm.
Okay. And Walid al-Khalidi, not Rashid al-Khalidi, but Walid al-Khalidi, I think is his cousin or his uncle. He actually wrote the foreword, and he was the one who edited the book and for accuracy and made sure the information are checked and corrected in this edition. I sent my nephew on like scavenger hunt in Jerusalem to find me a copy. He had to go to like old libraries, Palestinian libraries, until he found it and brought it with him to the United States
How
in his
wonderful.
suitcase. Yeah.
A big treasure on your
Yeah.
part.
We found also a book, also in Arabic only, and doesn't exist anymore. It's out of print, actually, if you know how I got a copy of that. So it was Dr. Hatem Kanane, who was in the film briefly. Sorry, Sharif Kanane. Hatem Kanane is his brother, and he helped us in the film. But he wrote actually one of the best accounts on Deir Yassin. And he was one of the first people to say, no, the people killed are around 108 or 109 persons only, not what the Haganah, the Etzel and Ergun exaggerated and said 240 or 260 in some accounts to scare Palestinians off their lands. So it was a calculated misrepresentation of the kill, exaggeration to scare people off.
Hmm.
And it was sent to me literally page by page by his secretary from his own book, like his own copy. At that time on Facebook Messenger. That's the only thing she was using.
Wow.
And I kept on like insisting, I want that book, I want that book. And she said that's the only way I could send it. Remember, this is back in the day. We didn't have smart cell phones
Right,
or
right.
WhatsApp or Signal.
But I mean,
Um,
how extraordinary.
yeah, and she
Um,
sent the whole book, one page at a time. And I translated the book, very quickly, not like very accurate, like not very meticulous translation, but I wanted to Andy to be able to understand it, because I speak, I'm fluent in Arabic, of course, but he is not.
mm, the this has been a very fruitful digression, right? Because you said, well, let me tell you the story about how we got the Deir Yassin interview. But
Yeah.
it's actually, it mirrors my own notion of what we saw in the film, which is Deir Yassin is one of the hinges on which the film turns.
Mhm.
Because the story is, why were people running? Well, first of all, they were not armed, they were not prepared to fight,
Mhm.
and they were not trained that this was what's going to happen. That was
Mhm.
entirely the opposite case for the kibbutzim and for the
Mhm. Mhm.
Haganah. They were told, they were given weapons, they were given training. You're going to do this one day. We're going to kill them. We're going to expel them. That was always the story. The Palestinians and Deir Yassin, as we know, had an agreement, a non-aggression agreement with the local authorities, which was ignored, which just shows you
Yeah.
the Israelis are as good as their word because they're the most moral army ever. And so this idea of Deir Yassin being the reason that we
Mhm.
maybe get another 200,000 leave, it's crucial. And so, as you say, might as well exaggerate it. And I think Morris and other people have the record of some people saying, let's say that it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that when they would go to the sheikhs of different villages and say, hey, if you don't leave, we're going to Deir Yassin you, and
Yeah.
that everybody knew before the internet, before telephones, all you had to do is mention Deir Yassin, and that was good for another
Yeah.
200,000,
And
300,000
also,
people.
they exaggerated the rapes. We know that rapes happened, but they exaggerated those also to instill fear in people's minds and make them run away. So you saw the at one point after we do the segment on Deir Yassin, because we asked a lot of people, why did you leave? And you see them all say Deir Yassin, Deir Yassin, Deir Yassin. If you remember
Yep.
that
You
clip.
you 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 cut it together so that
Yeah,
everyone said it, so that
because
you
we heard it over
hammered
and
it.
over, why did you leave? And of course that also defies the you know the wrong rumor that also the Israelis use, the myth they created, that it was the the Arab armies that told Palestinians to leave.
Right, which is
And it might have happened maybe in one or two villages where they told them, okay, they are going to attack you. We are going to try to protect the village, go out and come back. Maybe it happened in one or two villages, but it was not what the Israelis are saying, that the Arab army said, all of you leave and we will liberate you. That was just nonsense.
And once again, I refer to Benny Morris. He is the person who gives not only he gives a counter example in one case in which I think soldiers from the Arab Legion forced villagers back at gunpoint to go back to their village
Yeah.
because it's
Mhm.
going to create a logistical problem if you tell people to come. Now they're on the
Yeah.
road and they could get killed.
And
So
also they didn't want the refugees to go to Arab countries who were struggling themselves, because most Arab countries were either still under colonial rule, British, French, or Italian, etc.
when you say that hasn't changed.
Yeah, well, that's true. The armies left, but the mentality and the
They still
political,
do whatever America or Britain tells them to do.
yeah.
So
So they also didn't want, they were struggling themselves, and the myth of the Arab invading armies, the only armies that actually crossed the borders were the Jordanian, and the Jordanians knew where they stood. They had to protect what, the king at that time got, or, the prince at that time, got out of their deal with the Zionists. And the Egyptians were the only really army that fought to an extent, and it was only in the southern part of, mainly in the southern part of the West Bank, in the areas that were allocated anyway to the Palestinians, where the Israelis even, or the Zionists at that time, transgressed, basically beyond the allocated borders. The Lebanese never crossed, the Syrians barely breached the borders. And again,
yeah.
they were just liberated or not even liberated. The Lebanese were not even actually still liberated at that point, I
And
think.
I try to explain that to people, and they talk about, oh, six Arab armies invaded us. As I've come to understand how those armies were constituted, that they had Hashemite and anti-Hashemite factions. This was part of why the Syrian army didn't want to come in, because they didn't want to leave Syria open
Mhm.
for a takeover potentially that they were worried about. And there was no command and control. So really, the Arab Legion, yes, they were amazing.
Mhm.
However, they sold out the Palestinians for a
Yeah,
secret deal with the Israelis. So, and I mean, that's a separate conversation, right? Abdullah,
yeah.
all of that. So I think when people give that narrative, I say, okay, can you please talk to me? Because the Lebanese did make an incursion to a town and then they
Mhm.
withdrew because they wanted to say, yes, we fought
Yeah,
and
yeah.
went back. And as you say, the Egyptians had their own fighting, but they had their own agenda as well. That's why they also signed a separate deal. That's a different conversation. When this brings me on to another point, which in the film, we consistently hear Palestinians refer to the Jews. The Jews did this, the Jews
Mhm.
did that. And I've, on more than one occasion, been corrected in my reviews, books that I do. And I sometimes will say the Jews. But when I was in Beirut this summer, they said the same thing. The people in Beirut, the Lebanese, didn't say, sorry, what I meant was the Zionists. They will say the Jews. And I defended this use in the sense of, when you say the Jews, we're not saying, okay, all of you associated with the religion. It's that there is this idea that if we only say it's the Zionists, that the Jews who stand by, who are not necessarily Zionists, but are okay to accept what the Zionists do, that they're not guilty. So I don't see a big need to only say, oh, I'm only ever going to say Zionists. That sometimes when people say the Jews, as these people said, they're not trying to say, oh, I'm accusing all Jews everywhere of such.
Yeah.
Who were they fighting? It was the Jews.
Okay. I don't think we need to complicate this more than it needs to be complicated
I think
because
I just want to make sure
yeah.
that it's
No,
fair. That
it's
do
just
you feel it's important to parse?
Every Palestinian will actually use Jews. I mean, even in my family. But that's a very natural reaction to the fact that you have an supremacy in our land created for the Jews. It was not our decision really to make the flag the Star of David. So it's so in demonstrations when you use symbolism and you use the Star of David, the flag, they accuse of anti-Semitism, for example. Well, that was not my choice for the flag of the state of Israel. It was
Right,
not my choice to call it, the Jewish state. I mean, from day one, Herzl called it the Jewish state. He could have called it the Zionist state, right? But he actually called it the Jewish state. Everything that was presented to the Palestinian in terms of in forms of colonialism, violence, expulsion, etc., all of it was presented as we need to make room for Jews. So it's interesting that people don't understand that's how the Israelis actually imposed this kind of discourse on Palestinians. It was not the Palestinians saying, I'm anti-Semitic and I'm just gonna say Jews
right,
because I hate all Jews.
right.
On the contrary, if you look deep down, if you talk to anyone, first when I did the interviews and I worked in Beirut in 2008 for a whole month, I worked 6 days a week for a whole month, and it was August and it was hot and humid in Beirut. But anyway, so I did many, many interviews with the Palestinians. I actually don't have an account, but at least 60 or 70 I did. And every time I made it a point to ask my interviewees, was your town or village or city mixed? And they would say yes or no. Some of those towns and villages were mixed, and they had either Muslims and Jews, or Muslims and Christians, or all three religions in the same town or village. Like my city, my origin, which is Hebron or Al Khalil, we actually had we didn't have many Christians, but mainly we had Jews and Muslims. And my family itself is mixed, and everyone would say, "Oh, but those were different Jews. We're not talking about those Jews. Those were Palestinian Jews. They spoke Arabic. They were lived there for hundreds of years, like us. We had the same traditions, the same culture. We all spoke Arabic. They spoke Hebrew only for religious like teaching. We
No
went to their
connection to the
weddings. They
Jews who
came
live in
to
Hebron now.
what's that?
No connection to the Jews that live in Hebron now.
No, no. Let me tell you, I actually started a film that I never finished on the Jews in Hebron, because my grandmother was one of the family, and her brother and sister were one of the families in Al Khalil, and they were from Shaheen family, not Muhtaseb. So my grandmother is from Shaheen family, one of the many families in Al Khalil who protected Jews and hid them in their basement. And it was a manufactured, massacre against Jews in Hebron. And of course, she hid them because the kids, she nursed the kids of the Jewish mother. They called her mama, they called her mom, Immi. in Arabic. And so, of course, she hid them and she protected them. And then the British came and uprooted those indigenous Palestinian Jews out of Hebron in 1929. It was a brutal, violent, ethnic expulsion. Same thing, that happened to Palestinians. And they forced them to go and live with Zionists or Jews from Europe, who they had no connection whatsoever with. They didn't speak the same language. They didn't have the same cultures. They actually, in a way, hated them because they destroyed their lives, right? And they were forced to go and live with them because of their religion. My grandmother and her brother and sister kept all of their ownership. They didn't allow them to take anything, only their papers and money and few things only. So very similar to the what happened to Palestinians. And they kept it for them until they came in 1967, when Israel,
Came back.
occupied the West Bank and Gaza, the Golan Heights, and Sinai Peninsula. And so they gave them back all of their ownership. They kept it in the basement, in the same place, until 1967. And that's what most Americans would never hear. This is something those are the stories that you would never hear about.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, I'm surprised because I've been to the settlement, the Settlers Museum in Hebron, and they mention it in the museum that there were Palestinian families who saved Jewish families.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I can't believe they're mentioning this because it means that Palestinians are not human animals.
Usually they don't. And actually, when we did the screening, our very, very first screening, the premiere at the Arizona International Film Festival, there was an Israeli Jewish woman in the audience, and she kept on talking for 5 minutes. And one of the things she said, and they massacred the Jews in Hebron, for example, you don't mention this in the film, blah, blah. And I said, if you want me to, we had to be selective, but that's a very good story. I could tell you that my grandmother and, my great uncle and my great aunt, they actually protected Jews and many, many Palestinian families. So they downplay, their role. They only say there were Palestinians who killed them, but we know that these were thugs who were actually given money by the British and ordered to do this, because the British were also helping the Zionists in implementing their plan. The British role, something I wish we could have more time to talk about, is the British role, how they armed the Zionist militias, how they supported them. When they left them everything to, they allowed the Zionists to take any military equipments, even
they trained them in 1936 for the revolt, right? They trained them. This is how you kill Palestinians. Here are the weapons. And so they were preparing in the late 30s for 48.
In the Second World War, there was a whole battalion from the militias, from the Zionist Jewish militias, who went and fought on the side of the British. So they were like entwined in terms of arming and supporting, etc. And so, so the British, of course, in that case, played a very crucial role also in this massacre.
And I think to put a bow on that distinction between Zionist and Jews is I think for a long time people were trying to say, I'm going to use this word to protect, charges of anti-Semitism. But in the last 2 years specifically, we've seen this. The media has tried to conflate the two. That say if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Jewish, you're anti-Semitic. And so even if people want to use that distinction, I think the time is running out for them. That if you say you're an anti-Zionist, you're an anti-Semite. So I think it's
lastly, I just want to say that this is for the documentary. Some people actually critique that, and I was like, this is exactly how people refer to themselves, including the Jews, including the Zionists. They refer to Palestinians as Arabs, and they refer to themselves as Jews because all of them call themselves Palestinians. That's another thing that probably it's not very clear in the film. You really have to pay attention. If you pay attention, you will notice that at the beginning, we use Arab to refer to Palestinians. Even if we put their title, when we put the title, we actually say Palestinian from Haifa, Yafa. But the reference in the narration is Arab and Jews, because that's exactly how they distinguished themselves, because they were all Palestinians. So those militias, you will be surprised, but they actually call themselves Palestinians. There is a famous interview with what's her name, Golda Meir, when she actually talks about that freely. And she said, I called myself Palestinians. We all called ourselves
Yeah, she
Palestinians.
had an identity card that said she was Palestinian.
Yeah, because it was Palestine, at that time. Then after the creation of this state, if you notice in the documentary, we change the reference. We say, actually, we narrate that after that, the Jews started calling themselves Israelis, and the Arabs started, or the Palestinians continued to call themselves Palestinians.
Palestinian.
So that was an important distinguish. We were, again, historical accuracy. This is how Jews refer to themselves. I'm a Palestinian Jew, although they were not, they were European, but they actually adopted, or co-opted, let's say, Palestine.
That substitution is so crucial because Palestine has to be erased, right? Such that, and I'm sure you're familiar with Nurit Peled El-Hanahan's book on school books. And she says that in there, the children are taught about mandatory Israel. And it says, there's no such thing as mandatory Israel, but Israeli school children are taught, oh, this was mandatory Israel. Where is this? It was mandatory Palestine. The last thing, I don't want to take too much more of your time, and I want to answer some of the questions. Want to answer the questions in chat. Just, this is what happens. You get, excited and engaged, and thank you for so much of your time. I think one of the, whenever anybody says, how do I begin to talk about Palestine? Because there's 1,000 things, right? And then you say, okay, this one goes into 3 more things that I have to tell you about. And the most recent Journal of Palestine Studies has an article about the legality of the mandate. And I think when things are on your mind, then you spot them everywhere. And so when I was rewatching this film for the second time to prepare for our conversation today, it refers to the mandate. And I thought, oh, they couldn't go into the legality of it because that's a different movie. That's a different documentary, right? But I feel when we think about 48 and 67 as different ideas, 48, I suppose, is really, because I think the world wants to say, oh, it's 67, and that's what we have to get back to. The reality is actually we have to get back to 48 because there's this notion of what Palestine was, as opposed to, oh, we'll only take these 2 little portions, and everyone outside of the West Bank and Gaza, too bad, no right of refugee return. No, 67 is not good enough. 48 is where we have to go back to. And it's fundamental to understanding what's going on. And I think that's why you picked this was such an important part of the film, and why I'm very grateful. I'm sure people in the chat are grateful as well that you made that choice, because I actually think it's one of the major starting points. If people say, well, where do I start with Palestine? So we have to go back to 48.
Exactly. Yeah. And that explains everything that is happening today. I was not paying attention to the chat. Is there any question that?
Well, there's one. She says, please finish the other film. the one about Hebron. Is that the one you referred to?
I guess
that you said you had started the film and you gave up. You couldn't.
Yeah, that's gonna take another 10 years of my life. Yeah, I did interview my father's cousin in 2008. No, actually in 2006, just before my father died. Actually, I remember he took me and introduced me to one of his cousins, whose mother and father also, protected Jews. And I did the interview, and he talked to me about his relationship with them and how they played when they were kids, and how, the moms were very, very close and nursed each other's children. And in Islam, if you nurse a child for, I think, at least 5 times, there is a number there, so don't quote me on it.
Sure.
I'm not a religious scholar, but eventually that becomes your blood child. So that made the relationship so strong between the women, the Jewish and Muslim women. And they attended their weddings, celebrations. They knew their religious celebrations, and actually
we have all the photography. We have all of the stories. They celebrated each other's holidays. I always thought that was very funny. The Jews would celebrate the Islamic holidays, and the Muslims would celebrate.
Yes.
And we have photographic evidence of this in Jerusalem. So it wasn't like
and in Hebron, and it was because they lived very close. I mean, we're talking about this family lived with my grandmother and her family in the same building. They lived in the same building, and they hid them in the basement when the attackers, the Palestinians who were trying to kill them, came in. I just want to say that, okay, so my friend Sharon also interviewed the Jewish sibling. They call themselves sibling.
Okay.
Who was older. They were old, because remember, they were young in 1929.
Sure.
So I interviewed him 2006. She interviewed him in probably 2005, the year before or the same year. I can't remember. I have to go back to my notes and everything. And she gave me the recording, and she said she couldn't work on it anymore, and like I should take on that. So I did. I went to their house. I filmed a little bit. Now I don't think we can go to that area anymore, because you know how in Hebron they keep on taking more
I know.
streets, more buildings. And
I
then
had a
yeah,
I had
and
a
then
chance
I
to
had
speak to
to
the
put it
Palestinians
aside.
there
I
when
had
I
to put
was
it
there.
aside because there are other, I got, busy with other projects, and now we are working on a VR project on Gaza, the Gaza X Reel. If you want to check it out, gazaxr.com.
Let's put that in the
I
chat.
could actually probably put it in the chat.
It,
Okay,
like this?
okay, that's a very interesting story, but you have to bring me again for that.
Okay, we will. Let me try to get some of them on
Because we
stage.
filmed all of Gaza the year before it was destroyed in
Wow.
360 camera.
Again, a
By
wonderful.
coincidence. That was a total coincidence. That was a project that started with imagining a liberated Gaza, with capturing Gaza outside the realm of death and destruction, how people are resilient, they make life, happy moments. It was focusing honestly on the multiplicity of Gaza beyond the one dimensional, violence that you see always about Gaza, just for this project to turn into cultural heritage preservation.
Mm.
It's a very, very awkward one, but that's what we are
No,
working
but
on.
it's wonderful, and we've had some moments, I think, from the genocide of the last year, where we saw a woman sweep out her home, which had been bombed, but she wanted to keep
Mhm.
it clean, right? So she's sweeping
Yeah.
out the remnants, and you just
Oh,
think,
they do it all the time. Yeah.
but someone had put a caption like, "Please don't complain to me about your day today. This is
Mhm.
what this woman did."
Yeah.
Someone had asked if you asked Samuel Jackson as someone to.
No, we haven't thought of. I don't have any access. I try to think of people I could have access to. So Danny Glover, because he was connected to one of the Black Panthers I knew at San Francisco State. That was my connection. Literally, I met. He passed on, so he's no longer with us. But when I met him, I was like, he talked about his relationship with Danny Glover. I was like, oh, can you introduce me? Can we maybe ask him? And actually, we asked him, and he said he would consider it. Then he got into a new film and got busy. And yeah, so Angela Davis, the same thing. Through my academic circles, I had connection, but just yeah,
You have to try.
anyway, that didn't go anywhere, unfortunately.
From Farwalo, how did you get involved with this cause of Palestine? I had discovered some recently that I had written something in 2012 just on Twitter. It says, stop the occupation. But I must have read something back in 2012 that bothered me. But I think, like so many other people, you were referring to your colleague, Middle Eastern Studies major, but he didn't really understand till he got involved. And I think for me, it didn't really click until I visited. So I had a chance to go to Hebron. I got to go to the mosque, and I got to go cross over into the synagogue because I
When
have
did
a
you go?
last May 2023.
Oh, wow.
And you know who was in the Ibrahimini Mosque when I went was a young Palestinian couple doing their betrothal, and they were putting the lamps down into the tomb. And I
Yep.
just thought, like, what a special time. God has blessed me to be here for this moment. That is, they're still carrying on. She had this beautiful dress on. Must have been, very traditional dress. But just so I'm there in the mosque, and then I cross over, and there's the Jews on their side. And then, as I'm going through the checkpoint later, the guy is saying, yeah, God gave us the land. Look how we made the desert bloom. And, my brain is having to take both sides, but I don't feel adequate at the time. I listened to Yishai Fleischer talk about the fact that the solution to this problem is for the Arabs to leave. They have 20 other countries they can go to. So I was there during Jerusalem Day, and I was near the Muslim part of Jerusalem where the young Israeli children are taunting them, and I having conversations with IDF soldiers, and I say, well, have you ever considered that you might not be the good guys, and their brain couldn't handle it. So I come back from that, and I had read Ilan Pappé's Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, and I would say, for many people, including myself, the light doesn't click until you go to Palestine and you
Mhm.
talk to Palestinians. I
Have
talked to
you
this.
listened to Tanahi quotes?
Yes, recently he's done some interviews. I've
Yes,
actually
for his new book, The Message, which I
yeah.
ordered. I want to read so bad.
Yeah, I've done a review of one of his older books, which discusses the problem of race in America. But I think that he had to go and he had to learn. And then one of the things that I find so resilient among the Palestinians is there's still this joy, despite this incredible thing that has happened to them. They still try to make a life. This man I met in Bethlehem, a Christian, his family's been there 700 years, and he said, we build the settlements in the morning and then we complain about them in the afternoon, right? And he talked about how much money you can get paid to go work in the settlements.
Yeah,
And he says, it's like going to a science fiction world. They have running water, they have clean sidewalks, everything.
yeah, yeah.
So sorry, long answer to your question, Faralo. For me, I was woken up when I went to Palestine. I saw it myself. I went to the Erez crossing. We talked to Palestinians there. And it was led by a joint coalition, a Jew and a Palestinian, and they would exchange with each other. So they would hand
Mhm.
us to one side and they would say, okay, we're going to let you listen to them. And then we would get handed over. They say, okay, now you're going to listen to us. And it was a really wonderful experience because we were able to hear it and then
Mhm,
make
mhm.
decisions.
Yeah, by
Um,
the way, Andy himself is a average white American.
right.
And it would have been great if he could join us. Unfortunately, he couldn't.
So, Jamie, why are so many leftists, Marxists, feminists drawn to this cause when the worldviews of the two groups seem to be so different? I think implying, let's say, the traditional Palestinian may not necessarily support causes or ideas that leftists, Marxists, feminists would espouse. Do you have a thought or any idea about this?
I mean, the premise of the question is, again, not knowing, as you alluded to, Palestinian culture and history. It's sad, but I think people who get the chance to know from all walks of life would know the truth if they visit, or at least they read or try actually or attempt to learn. Um, the Palestinian Liberation Organization had a Marxist faction. So Marxism is well and alive in Palestine. I just want to say that.
Well,
And my father was part of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
I mean, this is Hassan Kanafani's, ideas as well, right? That they read
And
these
he was
ideas
from
that
the Popular Front, yes.
right. So
Um,
there is a tradition within it. But I think that the premise
yeah.
of the question is there are these traditional values, let's say, if you want to speak broadly, that
Mm.
they would in another life, in another way, they would disagree with Palestinians, but somehow, and I think you're
Well,
pointing it
that's the
out, is that
problem. That's a. I'm trying to find my words because I don't want to be offensive, but you are basically stereotyping Palestinians as coming with a certain ideology
mm,
as one per. It's similar, when you say all Jews are like this. So the question assumes that all Palestinians have very similar ideas and backgrounds, and they doesn't actually consider the multiplicity again of the Palestinian
sure,
nation.
sure,
That's what I was trying to explain. I was trying to explain that um, we have all kinds of backgrounds and ideologies and religions. Actually, we are one of the most diverse societies in the world where Christians, unfortunately, now Christians are a minority because of the same reason, it's the
mhm,
Israeli colonization. But
sure,
in 1948, I think Christians made up 25% of Palestinian nation. We have, of course, the Jewish communities. We have Druze, we have Baha'is, we have all kinds of other smaller religions. And in terms of political identifications and backgrounds, they are also multiple. In terms
sure,
of feminism, I think that's a very interesting one. We have one of the eldest women movements in the world, actually. But again, that's something we are so focused on talking about the colonization and the history and the occupation and the violence that we forget all other important aspects
sure,
of Palestinian life. But the problem is people have a very certain image of what a feminist would look like or behave in what way, because they have this notion of universality of experience of women around the world, and thus that feminists should be also universal.
Mm.
And I think that's a very problematic one. And I advise the person who, not only the person who asked the question, but anyone, to read, the work of feminists of color, Black feminists, feminists from so-called third world, right? Feminists of the South, global South, because they provide different perspectives. Muslim feminists, we have a very, very different perspective. But that's a problem here in the States. They have a very specific notion of what feminism is and how it should look like and sound like.
And
And
dressed like and
so,
eat
yes,
like,
so
etc.
yeah, I'm trying to address the premise of the question itself.
Yeah, and I suppose I would answer it slightly different in that when I talk to people, I'm surprised by how many different backgrounds we come from,
Yeah.
those of us who are in
Mhm.
support of the Palestinian cause. And I think what that shows is we are united in seeing injustice and we
Yes,
want it to be fixed. And we don't need to have an agenda and say, well, I only want to support this injustice if you also accept my worldview.
exactly.
Right? There's a
It's,
unity of understanding about what is going on here,
yeah.
and it has to be fixed. And in a sense, once the Palestinian issue is fixed, then we can go back to fighting about our other issues.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's an issue of, as you said, justice, and an issue of human rights. And, if you believe in those notions, whatever, regardless of how you perceive them and what your approach to the liberation, for example, looks like, you very naturally would support the Palestinian cause, in my view. It comes very natural. Who can look at 18, I don't know the latest count, but at least 18,000 dead, killed Palestinians and not, be moved with that to do something? How can you not react to genocide regardless? Genocide is genocide. You can't look at the skin of the person, their ideological beliefs, or the way they look, or the way they dress. I don't know.
I know you're going to say you're biased, but I think the point is people when they'll always say, Israelis have a right to defend themselves. I always say, do Palestinians not have a right to defend themselves? And I think they say you're not hearing the other side. And I've always said, if you spend 5 minutes looking at this issue, 5 minutes, you are not going to be objective. This is not a
Yeah,
question of 50-50 and like there's wrong on both sides. It's 98 wrong on one side,
no,
one, maybe
that's
2% wrong on the
this
other
is
side.
similar to saying, well, how about the rights and grievances of slave owners? Like, for me, this is how it sounds like. Or, but the Ku Klux Klans had a point, and we should look into that. Like, at one point we will reach the historical stage where we don't really talk about this in the same way, but it's going to be late for Palestinians, and unfortunately, you know what I mean?
Yep, I
Like,
understand what you're
it's
saying.
too late now for the slaves. It's too late for the indigenous populations in Turtle Islands and beyond. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Nobody now thinks, oh, what those Europeans came and did in Turtle Islands or in so-called Australia was right. No one looks at it this way, but it's too late for the indigenous populations.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what people will say to me because they've only come to see me become very passionate about this subject in the last year, since October of last year, where my brain just switched on and I said, okay, this I'm when I tell people all the time is when I heard that babies were beheaded and raped, I said, okay, the babies were raped while they were being beheaded, and then they were also put in the oven, all three at the same time. And I said, this is just and I think that was when I said I have to say something, I have to move forward. And so they're asking, Stephen, why does this matter so much to you? And I've often replied, in Palestine, whether they want to or not, they're they're representative of so much that is wrong in our world, is in this one space. All of the different issues that we are dealing with on every level is represented. I'm going to say in Palestine, maybe in a special way in Gaza, when we think about what is being done to the environment, what is being done to schools, what is being done to economic development. You have these uh, the military contracts that go in, the surveillance of people, all of these things come together, and we're able to kind of step back and look and say, well, what is going on in Palestine? What is going on in Gaza? is a reflection of what is happening to all of us in smaller ways in our world. Anthony Lowenstein's book about the Palestine laboratory, about how they're using battle-tested against terrorist technology, and then it goes and sits on the U.S.-Mexico southern border, or it
Exactly.
sits somewhere else. And these were paid for literally by the Palestinians' blackmail. They find out there's some homosexual Palestinians. They blackmail them through their surveillance technologies. And then this technology is sold to Europe, sold to America. So
Yes.
we're all participants in some way.
Yeah.
And so I think that
Well, we are all participants and we are all complicit simply because the genocide wouldn't have happened without our money, our tax money. This country has the authority and the ability to stop the genocide like this. I mean, literally. And we have examples from the past. I mean, as much as you might hate Reagan and his politics, inside the United States and outside, he actually at one point stopped the war, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon.
I know he's one of the few people who has ever said no to the Israelis on something. It just doesn't happen
Unfortunately,
anymore.
that's not happening, and on both sides, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I want to end on a good note, a happy note,
Yeah, let's find
because
a good note.
well, the good note is, first of all, thank you for your work. Thank you to Andy for your work. Now I found out 10 years of your life, so many other twists and turns, and you're continuing to promote it. So I hope that this interview will be a small contribution to some of that. You have some calls from people to release the director's cut, some of these
I will
other
talk.
things.
I'll have to think about that.
In the chat, but I think a lot of people expressing their appreciation for your work, and from myself as well. So thank you for that, and keep going, obviously. And I think one of the reflections I have a year after October the 7th is that, as we've seen numerous times in recent history, every time the Palestinians are threatened to be forgotten by the world, something happens to bring them back to the consciousness of the world. And I do feel I have been not in the fight as long as you have. I feel reading the history books and reading about accounts of different times that I don't want to say this time is different, but I do feel when I talk to older people, they say, I've never seen such criticism of Israel in the United States. I've never seen such support for Palestine in the United States. These are people who are 55, 60 years old.
True.
So they're telling me that. So then I have to say, okay, it must be different from before. I wasn't alive. But if they're telling me they've never heard such criticism of Israel in the United States, then okay, something must be slightly different. And I think that's because the Israelis didn't realize that social media exists now. And we can see them murdering babies and shooting people. We have recordings of Hind, Rajab. We have all of this stuff now. So they can't say it's a conspiracy theory by the Palestinians. We have it. They uploaded it themselves to social media.
Exactly.
So I think things maybe
I think they uploaded to social media. The mentality is very similar to what happened in Deir Yassin, which is to scare Palestinians and force them to run.
Yes. Yes, I think that's a great point. And that brings us back to Deir Yassin. So thank you so much for your time. I can't believe I'm looking at the clock. Hour 50 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. I thank you to people in the chat for staying with us on this interview. And obviously it'll be available to replay. And Ahlam will be in touch potentially about publicizing some of the other archives that you have. Thank you again for your work, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much Stephen for everything you do.
I appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Thank you.